Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Next Practices, COBIT5 IT Governance Framework. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Sharat Chenjari Rajgopal, Associate Manager, Quality and Process Improvement at Marlabs Software, Bangalore. Sharat has a bachelor's degree in computer science from Bangalore University, India. He is a Six Sigma Black Belt and a certified information security auditor. He has expertise in defining, implementing, and tailoring processes and procedures to specific standards and models with respect to CMMI, ITIL, ISO 20000 and COBIT. He has facilitated process assessments through audits and has taken the organization through ISO and CMMI certification process. He has experience in statistical process control and prediction techniques. Sharat has consulted with cross-cultural teams and customers through all stages of the delivery cycle. He has, through his learning, mentored hundreds of professionals at levels of management in the areas of quality, project management, and IT governance. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Sharat.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon to all of you. So it's truly a pleasure to be part of this session because first of all, thanks for all of you. I hope you guys would have had lunch. It's been pretty cold in Bangalore nowadays, so I've got my ACs turned off. Okay, first of all, thanks to this initiative from Times Group. It helps people, it helps to bring people together in terms of knowledge sharing. Special thanks to Moini Chaudhary. She was able to put this webinar at a very short notice. So the agenda is very simple. So we would probably spend a good amount of time to understand IT governance, very specifically the COBIT framework. So anyway, Moini has gone through my profile, so there's not much to talk about it again. The agenda for today is we'll try and first understand the relevance, or basically what is IT governance. There's a lot of myth around the industry in terms of what is IT governance, how, why. So one of the most popular frameworks to be developed and implemented across the industries is the COBIT5 framework. It's an IT governance framework. We look at the entire architecture of COBIT in terms of the principles, the policies, the enablers and things like that. We'll also brainstorm to put certain thoughts in terms of implementation framework, how organizations across the business industries can actually implement the COBIT IT governance framework. We'll look at in terms of how these processes once established, or the framework once established, can be assessed in terms of the capability with respect to meets the objectives behind implementing the framework. We look at some of the relevant standards which can be mapped with COBIT. There's a coexistence aspect. And of course, if there's any questions, we would probably take it to the end of the session. This session is purely an awareness building. There's no non-commercial value for it. The contents are solely from the ISACA. ISACA is probably it's an international professional organization which focuses mostly on IT governance, comes out with the COBIT framework. ISACA stands for Information Systems Audit and Control Association. They used to be known earlier. Now they are just known as ISACA. And COBIT is a framework from the ISACA Institute. COBIT stands for Control Objectives for Information and Related Technology. It's basically a framework created by ISACA for information technology management and, of course, IT governance. So having said that, we'll probably try and demystify IT governance. Sometime back in my organization, we had an all-hands meet, and we were fortunate to have our CEO part of it. He made a statement while addressing the entire organization. He said that it's not important in terms of whether being right or wrong. There's nothing called good or bad. What is important is to be effective. Probably being effective in terms of the current changing landscape of the business dynamics, the kind of industry we are in. So I'd call it as a defining moment because it helps to change the perception in which we think in terms of understanding the business and the solutions, the customers, and things like that. So I would always call it as the defining moment. So what is important is to be effective, which is very relevant as well. I've been a big fan of this movie called The Godfather. Of course, this is a little off track, but there is a relevance of a statement made in this movie to this webinar. The Marlon Brando, I mean, he's been a lead actor, and while he passes on the legacy to his son, Al Pacino, who's enacted this role, he says that keep your friends close, your enemies closer. Probably this is again a defining moment. This was said about, I mean, this is a movie based on a real life story. This is way back in the 1970s. Probably he was talking about anticipating and mitigating risks 70 years, I mean, almost about 40 years back. That's truly a defining moment. If you look at the current industry trends, the market, the business world, there's a significant change in the meaning of the term asset. Nowadays, even those intangible assets, say for example, information, knowledge, expertise, people, skills, reputation, etc., is a very important part of an organization's sustainable competitive advantages, because these assets rely on IT. So these are what we call the defining moments in terms of IT governance, trying to demystify IT governance. The current landscape, the business landscape, we all know, of course, for sure, IT is a major enabler to almost all business transformation initiatives. What is important is to understand how IT is being used, whether in terms of whether the organization achieves its vision, the mission, or a specific strategic goals. In today's complex and constantly changing business world, the alignment of IT to the business and IT governance is high on the agenda of the senior management. The reason is business drivers are probably the building blocks of strategy. They reflect goals, the accomplishments of the organizations which is after them. Strategic planning based on the alignment of IT goals. Two business goals is very critical in terms of the business IT alignment. This is probably the building block of IT governance. So once having done that, this needs to be cascaded into a set of goals for the specific departments, which will set the strategy, the IT strategy, to be more precise. Finally, we need all the supporting processes, which must be carefully planned to help translate or cascade these IT strategies into actions. Sorry for it. Continuing with understanding the business landscape, we all know for sure, we do understand customer is the king, he's the boss. If you look back in the offices, IT is overwhelmed with numerous changes, frequent demands by the business, because the world we are living in often comes by the way of it's like a flood. The business requesting like this minute solution, and when you look at the solution, this is for probably a new need. Increasingly, the senior management is realizing significant impact that IT has on the success of the enterprises. Top management basically need to understand if IT is able to likely achieve the objectives, judiciously managing the risks it faces, appropriately reorganizing or recognizing opportunities and acting upon them. This is of paramount importance. So now a perspective more from in terms of IT governance. We need to achieve success in this current information economy. Governance of IT is of course a very critical facet of the entire enterprise. According to Peter and Ross from MIT, the governance basically answers very critical questions. What decision must be made? Who should make these decisions? And how these decisions be made, or how will the decisions be made? And what is the process for monitoring the results? So, fundamentally, IT governance is the process by which the decisions are made around the IT investments. Governance basically ensures that enterprise objectives are achieved by looking into stakeholder needs, setting directions, by prioritizing, which is very important in terms of the business, all the stakeholders, making the appropriate decisions. And once made, we need to monitor them, monitor the performance, the compliance, the progress against those progress made against those decisions, of course. Management is more in terms of planning, building, executing, monitoring the activities in alignment with the direction set by the governance body to achieve what we call the enterprise objectives. So fundamentally, IT governance focuses specifically on information technology systems, their performance, and risk management. If you look back in terms of the governance basically fills the gap that is there between the business and the technical or the technology domains, and of course between the management and the strategy itself. So the basic objectives of IT governance, if we have to put it in a nutshell, is to align the IT strategy with business strategy. IT has strategic resource to deliver value, IT risk management, which is again of paramount importance, the resource and financial management, and of course the performance management, which is governed by, of course, the policies and procedures. What is most important is IT governance is, of course, the responsibility of the board of directors and executive management. Typically, if you look at boardroom meeting, they generally revolve around resource utilization, say billability, the bench strength or the bench weakness. Of course, they are the ones to be talked in the boardroom, but we need to go overboard now in terms of IT governance. This is probably 20 years back. This was good enough to talk about resource utilization or profitability or account management. There's more to it now which needs to be talked. IT governance is basically a board-led management framework. The top management gets involved on day-to-day operational issues as well. It's not a software solution. It's not a single proprietary framework for making IT an integrated, value-adding part of the business. We need to understand how this IT governance basically transforms these enterprises. It is fact-based strategy setting. The focus is on customers' point of view within the corporate framework, of course, where the participation is from the senior management. It needs to be strategic, which is basically long-term, and tactical, which is day-to-day operational. We need to track all costs to business value in all the activities. We have to provide iterative incremental improvements in terms of what we want to achieve. Treat architecture, technology, and security as an enterprise issue. We need highly motivated, high-performance organizations. It is an integral part of enterprise governance, which basically consists of the leadership, organizational structures, and of course, bottom line is the processes, which ensures that the organization's IT will sustain and extend the organization's strategies and objectives rather. So fundamentally, IT governance is concerned about two things, very fundamental. IT's delivery of value to the business, and how do we anticipate, control, and mitigate the risks. This is what we call the building block of IT governance. PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the big four consulting organizations, has captured some of the experiences of professionals and business houses in terms of their experience in implementing IT governance. They've conducted an extensive interviews with the business leaders from across different industry segments, and they have a summary. They've summed up the findings. During the interviews, the business leaders from many different organizations felt that IT alignment is the highest rated driver and outcome of IT governance practices. I mean, that's of course no excuses. That has been of the highest or probably the top priority. These business leaders have felt that IT governance is still very much associated with fulfilling control or compliance requirements. I'm tempted to say yes, but that's not all. There's something more to it. Of course, we need to fulfill the control or the compliance requirements. Most of these business leaders have felt that IT governance is driven only by top management. There is no much of an engagement model down below. That's probably something we need to change. One of the significant outcomes of this interview or survey from PricewaterhouseCoopers is these business leaders have said that the benefits of implementing IT governance are not measured, number one. Second is they say it is difficult to quantify. So one of the business leaders said that, this is one of the statements, what you can see down below here, you need someone in the driver's seat who knows the business process as well as IT processes, someone who's been there, done that at a detailed level. He says COBIT is a critical success factor. Without it, I can't achieve IT governance. This is captured from a specific individual, a business leader, of course. Going on with these experiences, we have been, PricewaterhouseCoopers has been able to quantify certain aspects of it based on the survey. They believe that about more than 95% of the participants, they're using one of the major IT governance frameworks. Okay, that's good news. There's a small number of them use their own frameworks, maybe consultant defined, homegrown, absolutely fine, no problem, we can go ahead with it. Major frameworks used by these organizations include COBIT, which accounts to close to about 63%, ITIL, Information Technology and Infrastructure Library from OGC, is about 60% of these organizations have been using it. There are other frameworks used to a lesser degree, which includes CMMI, predominantly from the software services industry, PRINCE2, which is a project management methodology from OGC again, COSO, and of course the ISO 17799 Information Security Standard. In 65% of the cases, organizations are using both COBIT and ITIL in terms of a combination with each other, with lesser known frameworks or with some other frameworks as well. But it is revolving around the usage of COBIT and ITIL. Some of the participants, or say a minority of the participants, use no frameworks at all. Of course, this is a reality. These are often these organizations with very low awareness basically in terms of governance. One of the business leaders said that I use frameworks, I think I moved, yeah. Said I use frameworks and standards for inspiration. That's very good. And we use what we think is useful, that's good, and relevant for our organization. And this is sheer common sense. So he says, I use frameworks and standards for inspiration. And we use what we think is useful and relevant for our organization. We have no intentions to get ourselves certified or to follow standards to the spirit of the letter. That's fantastic. In terms of the roles, responsibilities, this is of interest to all of us. The critical roles required for actually the IT governance implementation or the framework. Because the board of directors, we need the executive management, the chief information officer, the delivery officers, and of course the business unit executives. They make things happen. If you look at the specific role of the executive management, mostly in terms of a CEO and things like that, he has to cascade strategies, policies, and goals, provide organizational structures in terms of decision making. Most important is to embed clear accountabilities. This is often a pain area. Accountability is often a pain area. We need to measure performance time to time. Focus on core business competencies, IT must support. Focus on important processes, the IT processes, and of course we need to focus on the core competencies. So this is the role the executive management plays in terms of IT governance. There's been a review from the Harvard Business School. This, they've analyzed, assessed, and come out with kind of finding that a lack of board oversight for IT activities they feel is dangerous. It puts the firm at risk in the same way that failing to audit its book would. That's true as well. The most effective IT governance programs in the world are basically championed by the executive management and of course the board of directors as well. They are embraced in one form or another at every level of the enterprise. That is very essential. The most successful businesses changes enabled by IT are those initiated, championed, and directed by the business executives. The role is, of course, again of paramount importance. Effective governance of IT requires proactive involvement of the board and the executive management. And this is what the message the IT governance framework is getting across the business domain or across the globe. That effective governance of IT requires proactive involvement of the board and of course the executive management and of course the business unit executives as well. So we have set a kind of a pedestal to try and demystify IT governance, the relevance or the importance of it. So now we try and focus on what is COBIT as an IT governance framework. So how how it has been defined as a business framework for the governance and the management of the enterprise IT. COBIT is generic and is useful for the enterprises of all sizes, commercial, not for profit, of in the public sector, of course. COBIT5 is a next generation edition of ISAC's globally accepted framework, provides end-to-end business view of the governance of enterprise IT, which reflects the role of information and technology in creating the value for enterprises. COBIT5 enables IT to be governed and managed in a holistic manner for the entire enterprise, taking full end-to-end businesses and IT functional areas of responsibility, which primarily considering the IT-related interests of both the internal and external stakeholders. COBIT5, if we look at COBIT5, which actually builds on close to about more than 15 years of practical usage and application of the predecessors of COBIT by many enterprises, business organizations, and users from, of course, as I said, business, IT, risk, security, and assurance communities, which has been helping the enterprise leaders create optimal value from information and technology. So this happens by maintaining a balance amongst realizing the benefits, optimizing the risk levels, and of course the resource use. So COBIT is, the acronym for COBIT is Control Objectives for Information and Related Technology. It's a framework created by ISACA for the information technology management and of course the IT governance. How COBIT5 evolved back in the mid-90s to where we are. It has gone through a series of iterations, both embraced and appreciated by the industry as such. And you can actually get into the ISACA website. The tangents are there on the screen. You can actually look at how COBIT has evolved over a period of time from being a control with respect to audit, now moving on to the management, the governance of enterprise IT. So there are certain fundamental drivers why COBIT5 was developed as an IT governance framework. The reason, one of the top reasons were provide more stakeholders a say in determining what they expect from information and related technology. So that is a point to ponder. Address the increasing dependency of enterprise success on external business and IT parties, dealing with the amount of information which has increased significantly, and deal with much more pervasive IT. I mean, IT is there everywhere. Provide guidance, further guidance in the areas of innovation and emerging technologies. Of course, innovation is one of the factors which helps organizations to build in value, and of course the other tangents like profitability and things like that. Cover the full end-to-end business and IT functional responsibilities to get better control over increasing user-initiated and user-controlled IT solutions, what we see in today's world. We need to achieve the enterprise value creation through effective and innovative use of enterprise IT. We need to achieve enterprise business user satisfaction with IT engagements and service models. We need to achieve enterprise compliance with relevant laws, regulations, contractual agreements, and some of those internal policies. So they have been the drivers for why ISACA and of course the IT Governance Institute has contributed to come out with this COBIT5 IT governance framework. Yet another research done by PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, in terms of trying to quantify the benefits of implementing COBIT5 governance framework. They've interviewed more than about 800 IT and business respondents across the geographic locations, and this is what they have to say. 38% of them respondents cited that lower IT costs as an outcome of governance of IT practices. So that is, sorry, missed it. So that is a big benefit. 28% of the respondents cited that there's been an improved business competitiveness, which is good news. 27% of the respondents indicated an improved return on investment. So this is again a good news. There have been less tangible benefits as well reported, such as management of IT-related risks. Say 42% of the respondents believe that the management of IT-related risks has been a lot more effective. Improved communication and relationship between business and IT. This is can be a tangible, intangible as well. And improved IT delivery of business objectives. So there's, if you see again, so there has been significant benefits of implementing COBIT5 IT governance framework. So if you look at COBIT as a framework, the COBIT5 as a framework, it is relatively new in the market, in the industry, and there has already been quantified benefits found out from the industry with respect to its implementation. So we'll now probably put our thoughts to try and understand or try to focus on the architecture of COBIT, how COBIT derives the value of IT governance in its full sense. So COBIT5 is based on 5 key principles for both governance and management of enterprise IT. So it starts with meeting the stakeholder needs, the entire enterprise, covering the entire enterprise end to end, coming out with a single integrated framework for achieving the IT governance objectives, having a holistic approach, and of course we need to understand the difference between what is governance and management. So COBIT5 clearly sets out the aspects of what is governance and what is management, basically the activities which is part of governance and management. So if you look at the COBIT5 architecture, it is at the top is the value creation, understanding the stakeholder needs, governance objectives. There are enablers, basically the processes, some significant amount of expertise developed, like a knowledge base, and the set of products. So COBIT5, the building block of COBIT5 is the architecture. In terms of the architecture are these 5 key principles, which we'll probably spend a little more time to understand each one of them in terms of what they are and what do they say about in terms of the implementation of the framework. The first principle, meeting stakeholder needs. Enterprise, we all know that enterprise basically exists to create value for our stakeholders. So value is created by maintaining a balance between the realization of benefits, the optimization of risk, basically in terms of anticipating, controlling or mitigating the risks, and of course the effective use of resources. So an enterprise can basically customize COBIT5 to suit its own context. So this, please keep in your mind, COBIT5 is customizable based on a specific organization's specific needs. So this customization is done through a method called the goals cascade method, translating these enterprise goals into, say, very specific manageable IT related goals, and mapping these goals to certain processes and practices. So this is an important aspect of meeting the stakeholder needs. So what we'll do is try and understand how. Stakeholder drivers. What drives the stakeholder? Basically the environment, the technology evolution and things like that, which influence the stakeholder needs, where we need to realize the business benefits, risk optimization, resource optimization, which basically will cascade to an enterprise goal, which then gets transformed into IT related goals. And achieving these IT related goals is through what COBIT5 calls it as the enablers. So we try to understand each one of them a little more. The first step, stakeholder drivers influence the stakeholder needs. Example, say strategy changes, changing business and regulatory environment, and say new technologies. The stakeholders' needs transform into enterprise goals. These goals can be generic goals. It can be developed using a balanced scorecard method, where the entire management, the senior management, the business executives, the executive management will brainstorm using a balanced scorecard sheet to put up what are those enterprise goals. Basically, it's a list of commonly used goals that an enterprise may define for itself. Most of these enterprise-specific goals can be mapped easily onto one or more generic enterprise goals. COBIT5 basically defines 17 generic goals, which includes information in terms of a balanced scorecard, the specific enterprise goals as well, and a relationship between the 3 main governance objectives. As we said here in the previous slide, we talked about business benefit realization, risk optimization, and resource optimization. So they are going to be mapped with these 3 objectives. This is a classic view of a balanced scorecard sheet. The COBIT5 goals cascade, they're striped into 4 categories, what we call the dimensions: the financial, the customer, the internal customers, learning and growth. It has been mapped to the benefits realization, the risk optimization, and resource optimization. These are basically the enterprise goals. These enterprise goals, whatever listed here, 17, they are not complete. Organizations can add their own because these are very generic. It still reflects a large section of the business world. Specific industries, organizations can identify their own enterprise goals and map these goals to how we are going to related to the governance objectives, basically in terms of benefits realization, risk optimization, and resource optimization. P stands for the primary relationship. That is, a strong relationship will exist between the enterprise goals and which of these governance objective. S is basically a secondary relationship. It's like less strong relationship. Now, the enterprise goals, once you brainstorm, it goes through a lot of iterations before an organization will have those goals. So once the enterprise goals are mapped and documented in a business balance scorecard, then these goals need to be cascaded to IT-related goals. So again, the IT dimensions in terms of financial, customer, internal, and learning and growth. So the enterprise goals are now going to be transformed or mapped to the IT-related goals. There are close to about 17. This is again very generic. Every organization can add upon to this list. So once IT-related goals are the enterprise goals are mapped to IT-related goals, all that the organization needs to do is map these IT-related goals to what we call the enablers. Enablers are basically in terms of the implementation, the processes, the policies, the framework, the people, the skills, the behaviors, the competencies required for an entire organization to map the business objective or the enterprise goals to the IT goals and in terms of the implementation. So the IT related goals will be cascaded to enabler goals. So we'll actually see the enabler goals in a little more. So the principle 2 basically talks about covering the entire enterprise end to end. It talks about how these governance objectives, the value creation aspects, are actually achieved or covered. So basically we have two aspects to it. One is the governance enablers and one is the governance scope. And of course we'll define the roles, the activities, and the relationships. So enablers are nothing but organization resources for governance. As I said, the principles, the frameworks, the structures required, the processes, the practices, the enterprise resources, let's say service capability in terms of say IT infrastructure, applications, people, and information. Only point we need to be a little cautious here is lack of resources or say lack of enablers may affect the ability of the enterprise to realize those values. So this is of primary importance which we need to ponder over. The scope of governance basically talks about governance can be applied to either an entire enterprise, a specific entity, or it can be a tangible or an intangible asset. So we can define our own scope in terms of how or where we want to implement these aspects. Then we'll define the roles, the activities, and of course the relationship. This is mostly in terms of who is involved in governance, how they are involved, what they do, how they interact within the scope of any governance system. And there is a very well established mapping of the roles, activities, and the relationship. This is mostly in terms of the implementation. Principle 3 is applying a single integrated framework. If you if you jog your memory, sometime back we said that COBIT5 is evolved from the predecessors. COBIT5 is, it integrates knowledge previously dispersed over other frameworks like COBIT, the predecessors of COBIT, VAL IT, Risk IT, and other aspects. So together it's more a collection of the best practices put together to achieve those business objectives, the enterprise value creation. Enabling a holistic approach. This principle 4 and of course the principle 5 is mostly in terms of how do we implement these governance frameworks, the COBIT5 governance frameworks. So we have the principle 4 in terms of the COBIT5 enablers. So enablers are nothing but the organization resources which we are going to use to achieve those values. Enablers are factors which let's say individually or collectively can influence something, whether something is going to work or not. So there are 7 categories of enablers, principles, policies, and frameworks that are the vehicles to translate the desired behaviors into practical guidance in terms of day-to-day management. Processes, of course, we all know very well. They describe an organized set of activities to achieve certain objectives and of course which will produce certain outputs. The organization structures are more in terms of what we call it as the key decision-making entities in an organization or in an enterprise. Paramount importance here is the fourth, culture, the ethics and behavior. Of course, it is still an underestimated aspect of the business, but it needs to be dealt with. And enablers, one of the enablers is the information itself. Information, as we know, is pervasive throughout an organization. It includes, say for example, information produced and used by the entire enterprise itself. So information is basically required for keeping the organization running and well governed. But at the operational level, information is very often the key product of the enterprise itself. So everything revolves around information. And then of course, the services, the infrastructure and applications. Say we can actually include the infrastructure, technology, applications that basically provide the enterprise with information technology processing and services. It's something interesting. And of course, the underlying aspect of the enablers are the people, the skills and the competencies, which are basically linked to people. They are required for successful completion of all activities and for making correct decisions and taking corrective actions if they are not. Excuse. There's a large dimension to these enablers. So all enablers, they basically have a common dimensions. This is, as I said again, I'm reiterating, the principle 4 and principle 5 is mostly from the implementation of IT governance. The enabler dimensions, there are 4 common dimensions for enablers. As I said, stakeholders, the goals, the life cycle, and of course the good practices. So stakeholders, each enabler has a stakeholder. So at in a simple way, to put it in a simple way, stakeholder is like, it can be a party who plays an active role and he has an interest, he or she has an interest in a specific enabler. Goals, each enabler has numerous or a number of goals and basically which can be measured in terms of, say for example, what is the expected outcome of a particular enabler. And then most important is it has a full life cycle approach. Each enabler has a life cycle from its inception through an operational life until it is disposed. The phases of the life cycle can be planning, designing, build, acquire, create and implement a specific enabler, how to use and operate, evaluate, monitor, update and close. Good practices as a name, what are the current set of good practices we need and what are the work products which would come out in terms of an input and output for these enablers. Again, most importantly here is in terms of the enabler performance management. So enabler dimension is more in terms of the strategy. The enabler performance management is more in terms of the monitoring. So enterprises basically expect positive outcomes from the applications and use of these enablers. So for example, we want to know, for example, say our stakeholders' needs addressed, our enabler goals achieved, is the enabler lifecycle managed well, and are good practices applied. So the first two basically in terms of stakeholder needs being addressed and enabler goals being addressed, they actually deal with the actual outcome of a particular enabler. So we call it as a lag indicator. So there are some terms and terminologies that we need to be aware of. Because being from the IT industry predominantly we are used to it. The last two which talks about is the life cycle managed or good practices applied. They are called basically the lead indicators. They talk about the actual functioning of the enabler itself. So this is in terms of the implementation. So there is a dimension to the enablers, so which will help us to understand how the implementation will be more effective. Principle 5, in line with Principle 4, tries to define clearly, very precisely, in a crisp manner, what is governance and what is management? How different are they? Governance is more the big picture. It ensures like what are the stakeholder needs, how do we determine those objectives which we need to achieve, how do we set directions, how do we or what decisions we make, how do we monitor the performance, etc. Management is basically in terms of planning, building, execution, of course, for monitoring the activities, and in alignment with the directions set by the governance framework. So in most enterprises, if we look back, enterprise governance, sorry, I think mouse over. Okay, enterprise governance is basically the responsibility of the board of directors under the leadership of a chairman. In most enterprises, management is the responsibility of the executive management under the leadership of a CEO or a CIO or a CDO. So this is something which we need to remember. Okay, this gives a better idea about the understanding or definition of governance and management. So governance basically talks about evaluating the customer needs, directing, coming out with the objectives, directing those objectives, monitoring how they are performing. So management is, as I said, planning, building, execution, and monitoring. So governance contains five processes. Within each process, there'll be something like evaluate, direct, and monitor the practices. We can probably come back here. These five domains are, if I can try to read from the governance framework, these five basically are here. So governance is at the top of the umbrella. Evaluate, direct, and monitor. The five governance processes, basically they are nothing but ensure governance framework setting and maintenance, ensure benefits are delivered, the risk optimization, stakeholder transparency, they're all here. Then in terms of management, the management contains four domains in lines with the responsibility areas of planning, building, and running and monitoring. So align, plan, and organize in terms of the enablers, build, acquire, and implement, deliver service and support, and monitor, evaluate, and asset. This is one of the biggest advantage of COBIT5. It is this framework, whatever we see on the screen right now, in terms of the governance and the management aspects, it can be used as a tool for the implementation. Clear cut, very crisp. So in terms of implementation, yeah, this is the principle 4 and 5 to a large extent has actually tried to instigate a thought process in terms of how we are going to implement them. So it gives a clear, if you go back to the slides here, in terms of the governance, the management, the specific activities rather, I could put it across like. Now we try and understand the road ahead. So in terms of actually going ahead and implementing the COBIT5 governance framework. So every enterprise needs to have or design its own implementation plan or a roadmap. It has to take into consideration the ethics, the cultures, any applicable laws, regulatories, the policies, practices, specific management styles, how effective are our risk management controls, the capabilities, what capabilities and the available resources, and are there any industry practices. So these are things to consider in terms of an enterprise, the enterprise context, in terms of end-to-end. There are certain success factors for implementing. Of course, top management has to provide the direction, set the mandate for the initiatives. All parties supporting governance and management processes to really understand the business and IT objectives. We need to ensure effective communication, enablement, and enablement of necessary changes. Sorry, I could not get it right. We can tailor COBIT and any other supporting good practices and standards to fit to our context. That is important. And we need to focus on quick wins and prioritizing most beneficial improvements that are as easiest to implement. So these are some of those very critical success factors for effectively implementing the COBIT5 IT governance framework. And as I said, COBIT5 is a tool in itself. It gives you in a platter how we can actually implement, monitor, and realize the benefits and value out of it. So there's a full life cycle approach. They are in terms of program management, change enablement, and of course the continuous improvement life cycle. So this is a fantastic benefit or aspect in terms of implementation, a full life cycle approach. Organizations who implement for instance, any of the models or frameworks or standards, there's always an aspect of we want to benchmark and see what is the capability of the processes, the practices, or the cultures, what we have established and demonstrated in the organization with respect to the competitors or the competition. So COBIT5 has a process capability model. This is for all of you who have actually come from an ISO or predominantly from a CMMI kind of perspective, can better able to understand in terms of the process capability model. It's a beautiful model which is based on the internationally recognized the ISO IEC 15504 software engineering standard. So basically this model will provide a means to measure the performance of any governance and the management. So it allows areas for improvements to be identified. It is basically benchmarking, nothing but benchmarking. So there are 6 levels of capabilities. So there is once you start implementing your governance framework, you can actually benchmark them against the process capability model. So there is an incomplete process, there's a perform process, So there are 6 levels of capabilities. So there is an incomplete, that means the process is not implemented or fails. There's a perform process, that means there is some amount of structured. A managed process, there is a lot more visibility and maturity in terms of the processes itself, and the processes are established now with the involvement of different various stakeholders. Then of course once there is a fair amount of maturity in terms of our process, so we can start predicting the outcome of a process much before we actually perform a particular activity. So we bring a lot of statistical process controls, prediction techniques and things like that, and how continually we will optimize the processes. So these are the 6 levels of capabilities which COBIT5 IT Governance Framework provides. So this is any organization who would want to implement and benchmark their processes or their governance frameworks can actually go by this method. It's a very effective proven method. So as I said, each process can be rated in terms of to what degree each objective is achieved. Either it can be like not achieved, partially achieved, largely achieved, or fully achieved. So this is how a process capability model can be established. In terms of mapping COBIT5 IT governance framework with the current industry standards and frameworks, of course there are quite a few. There's been a strong mapping of COBIT5 with ISO IEC 38500. This is a full-fledged ISO standard for the IT governance implementation of IT governance framework. COBIT5, whatever processes or COBIT5, whatever has been established, the ISO 38500, the organizations can actually use the ISO 38500 to implement the IT governance framework. There is a clear one-on-one mapping of COBIT processes, the COBIT philosophy itself in terms of the ISO 38500. Say, if you look at the 6 principles of them, responsibilities, strategies, acquisitions, etc. There is a mapping of the much talked about ITIL version 3, Information Technology and Infrastructure Library from OGC. So there is a mapping of it, and of course corresponding ISO 20000. ISO 20000 is an international standard for implementing IT service management system. This is something I probably should have talked a bit of. The relevance of information security. So COBIT5 IT governance framework, there is a mapping to the ISO IEC 27000 series information security standard, and of course there is a mapping of to the CMMI Prince2, which is a project management methodology from the OGC. So if you look back, COBIT5 is nothing new. There is whatever the industry standards relevant, of course, which has already been there for a long time since now. There is a clear mapping of COBIT5. So there is what we talked about a specific principle of COBIT, an integrated framework approach to implementing IT governance. Because each of this can be talked in depth, and we're trying to focus only in terms of bullet points. Because I'm tempted not to close the session because I feel we've just started or probably just trying to demystify the IT governance framework. Time is often being a big constraint. So there's a quick recap. So simply stated, COBIT5 provides all the structure and tools needed to deliver trust and value, manage the risks, basically in terms of anticipate, control, mitigate the risks, avoid any potential embarrassments. The COBIT5 principles, the 7 enablers, which are generic, of course, in nature. It can fit into any organization. Can be used to understand how the implementation of IT governance framework with respect to, say, a COBIT5 or a VAL IT or an ISO 20000, 38000 can be more effective. So the clear lifecycle model is available. We can implement those lifecycle models. And of course, thank you for participating in this session. I mean, of course, we all do understand there's more of an awareness in terms of trying to demystify what is COBIT5 and things like that. It is truly a pleasure to be part of this endeavor. And of course, when I first started on this webinar, I mean, much before we came online, when I was to do this, I mean, I've generally done in front of an audience. So this has truly been a new experience for me as well, in terms of talking about IT governance. It's a big thing to an audience which is probably in the virtual world. I always say we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is something which we need to think on. I mean, this I've been inspired, of course, by Aristotle. And from the movie Three Idiots, the lead actor Amir Khan says that success ke piche mat bar. Excellence is important. So we need to make excellence an act. It's not an act, it's a habit. So I put my tangents here on my coordinates. It would be a great pleasure to exchange thoughts with the audience here, learned audience here. So thank you very much for being part of this webinar, and also thank the Times Group and of course Moini Chowdhury to organize this at such a short notice of time. So if you have any questions, please free. I think I've probably gone a little overboard in terms of time because this is something which is always tempting. So, so please let me know if you have any specific questions.
Few questions, Sharath. I hope you were able to see them.
Okay, there's a question on how does this differ from the SOX? SOX compliance is more in terms of course it covers an aspect of IT. This more in terms of financial transparency and financial reporting. Because SOX is very much an IT governance framework. Okay, there's a question like, how is this different from IS 27001? IS, we need to understand 27001. The perspective of 27001 is largely in terms of information security practices, where the same is the information security is a small aspect of the COBIT5 IT governance model. So ISMS is very much part of the COBIT5 IT governance framework. So it's a subset. There's a small small set of practices for information security, and IT governance COBIT5 framework has it all. So any more questions? So if there are no questions, again, I'll probably not want to go out of it. Okay, I think there's one question. What's the difference between COBIT classes and 27001 classes? Okay, as I said, I'll reiterate. The 27001 classes are clearly mapped with the COBIT5 IT governance framework. There's a whole lot of governance scope and enablers in COBIT5 IT governance framework, which helps implement 27001 information security standards. Absolutely, there is a full strong mapping of it.
Can you please enlarge your window? I have a few questions sent there.
So I'm trying to do that. One moment. I'm not able to do this. Enlarge it. Okay, one moment. Okay, let me see now. Missed on anything? Hello, are you there?
To see it in the full screen mode? The questions?
I'm unable to actually see it in the full screen mode. Not sure why.
You need to undock the questions pane from the control panel.
Okay, let me try and see if I can do that. No, I think it's not happening. Probably we could do that. Any of you would have these questions, I put my coordinates in there. So put it to my, send it to my email address. So I'd probably have each one of them addressed in more detail and information. Probably I'm unable to actually get it to a full view mode. So probably I do that. I see a lot of questions. Okay, that's good.
Well, thank you so much for the insightful presentation, Mr. Sharath.
It's a pleasure here too.
I would request the attendees to please send in their questions to Sharath's email ID, which is shown on the screen.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to do it. Yeah, it would be great.
I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of this session would be available on TechGig.com on the webinar page by evening. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers.